thank you to my contact in this, Brad Banner. I know there's a lot more of you that participated in putting this together, and unfortunately I don't know your name. So just a general thank you to the folks that did make this happen. Also, most importantly, thank you to you for being here. Understanding the cannabis industry is a challenge. It's a monumental challenge. This is an incredibly complex industry, and we are on the fast track with the January 1st, 2018 deadline fast approaching. So I tremendously appreciate you being here, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak. Am I close enough to the mic?
Good.
So, my name is Jamie Kerr. I am the founder of Roots Consulting, which is a consulting firm that I built from 3 different perspectives I've gathered over the past 7.5 years. A direct, boots-on-the-ground cannabis operator, a city official, and a legislative policy advisor. And so, backing up to how I got into this industry, I opened a storefront dispensary in 2009. We're located in the city of Shasta Lake, and we've been in compliance with our city and our local ordinance since the very first day that we opened. In 2011, due to a shortage of consistent edible products on the market in my area at the time, I launched an in-house edible line that is now represented in a number of other dispensaries throughout Northern California. In 2012, I got very involved with my Chamber of Commerce. I've served on their board of directors. And then in 2013, I was encouraged to seek a vacant appointment on my planning commission. I was appointed, and then a few months after that, I was appointed to a full term. During my tenure as a planning commissioner, I did serve as chair for the 2016 calendar year. I resigned December of this year so I could get more actively involved with my local cannabis policy as the city of Shasta Lake moves the ball forward there. In 2014 and 15, I was very involved in a couple of trade associations, primarily California Growers Association, who's working with folks like us and making sure that we continue to get access in the hands of the people that need it the most. I served as policy director for California Growers Association during the 2015 legislative session, which at the end of, we got the 3 foundation bills for the Medical Cannabis Safety and Regulation Act of 2015. And so in 2016, I went back to local communities, and I've been doing a lot of outreach with local governments, other state officials, trying to spread the word, spread the knowledge about what the industry looks like, how it works, and how we can all move this ball forward, because it is going to be a monumental undertaking. So from these different perspectives, cannabis operator, city official, legislative advisor, today I want to give you some points of clarity and some direction that local regulators like yourself can take back to your communities and really start the discussion as to how or if you want the cannabis industry involved in your city or your county. So I don't have a PowerPoint, so you guys just have to listen to me talk. But I'm gonna go through 3 sections. I want to share with you the mechanics of a dispensary, what a retail operation looks like, and give you some of the vital statistics that you could then maybe take home and look at, well, how would this be similar or different to what would work in your areas. I want to share some ideas, some best practices that have worked within the city of Shasta Lake, and some just general understandings that I've come to realize over the past 7 years. And these are intended to give you ideas that you can take back, and maybe how you start the conversation, and again, in your own localities. And then finally, I want to share my biggest concern, not just for my dispensary, but for the industry in general, as we move towards 2018 and beyond. And so, bear with me. So jumping directly into some of the mechanics and vital statistics of my dispensary, we are located in the city of Shasta Lake, which has a population of 10,000 people. We are housed in the county of Shasta, population of just under 180,000. Within Shasta County, there are only 3 permitted dispensaries, mine and 2 others. Realistically, we serve probably an 8-county radius, because in the surrounding counties, with the exception of Siskiyou to the north, there is a full-scale ban on almost cannabis activity between Shasta County and Sacramento. Today, 530 Collective sits in a building that's 2,000 square feet. It houses the dispensary, and that's about 90% of it. And then we also house the in-house edible line, which is also a wholesale operation. I employ 16 full-time staff, that includes myself. On a daily basis, the dispensary, and this is an average because while cannabis is not a seasonal industry, there is a seasonality to it due to the harvest cycle, primarily in the outdoor cultivation. We see approximately 125 transactions a day. We do about 125 transactions per day, and we are open 365 days a year. Within the dispensary, we break out the products that we provide into 6 categories. And I would venture to say that these 6 categories are going to be uniform and standard throughout any dispensary in California and probably within the nation. The flowers, which we just saw a wonderful PowerPoint on, the flower product, the pre-roll products, which are joints, that's the colloquial term. Oh, everybody's heard of joints. In the industry, we do refer to them more as pre-rolls. Concentrated products, these are the products that are helping stylists. One of the types of concentrates is what's being used to help children and anybody that's having seizures. We see edible products, food infused with cannabis, topicals, and plants and seeds. I'm going to lump those into one category. So those 6 categories make up the product portfolio, the product mix of, I would say, any dispensary out there. The way dispensaries operate today is vastly different as to how they will operate going forward. So the supply chain, how it works today, is extremely loose, it's unregulated, and it's, in a lot of ways, very simplistic. So if a farmer, patient at this point, because that's really all we're talking about, is we're still in the medical cannabis stage only. Somebody grows plants, they produce flower, they bring it to a dispensary, there's a financial transaction, and that's the end of it. So while it will look similar going forward, the way it happens today, there's no regulation. There's nothing that ensures that what's being provided to me is grown sustainably, lawfully. There's no mechanism for me to verify that or check that. Also important to understand is that about 95% of the cultivators that I see, the vendors that bring me flower on an almost daily basis, are small farmers. They're craft cultivators. They're artisan growers. And so if you translate that to the MCRSA license types, they're primarily type 1. That's 5,000 square feet of production or less. And I would say going even further, the vast majority of those are going to fall into the type 1C, which is the newly created license type for specialty cottage cultivation, 2,500 square feet or less. I mention this because I think it's important to realize that we're talking about a lot of cultivation, but small businesses, small farmers. We don't see big scale cultivation happening in the lawful market yet in California. So out of the 6 product categories that I mentioned, I want to share with you the percentages that are allocated to each of those. So in the dispensary, 58% of my product portfolio is flower. That's dried cannabis, either indoor or outdoor grown, indoor, outdoor, or greenhouse grown, 58%. The pre-roll category is 19%. And that can be pre-rolls made of either outdoor grown cannabis, indoor grown cannabis, or greenhouse. The concentrate market, 13%. And rapidly growing, and that's important to note. Out of the 6 product categories, concentrates are growing I would say at a rate of 40%. So that 13 is climbing. Edibles make up 8%, plants and seeds 2%, and topicals 1%. So I want to move to my second area of focus today. I want to share with you some points, ideas, and best practices that have worked for the city of Shasta Lake that I've come to understand over the past 7.5 years, and that I think are also pertinent to what you folks are now going to be tasked with. I would understand that from this point going forward, when you go back to your localities and you're having a conversation about cannabis, there are two different conversations that are really taking place. There's personal use, people just growing in their backyards a couple of plants for personal consumption. But now we can have the conversation about commercial cannabis. We haven't really been able to make this distinction before because we haven't had a pathway to a commercial regulated marketplace. We do now. So it is important to keep those two conversations separate. I would also recognize the fact that cannabis, I won't say cannabis has been a problem in communities, but there have been problems surrounding cannabis in the communities. So these issues have developed primarily because we have had unregulated agriculture and unregulated commerce taking place in residential zones or, of course, on public land. So this unregulated agriculture, unregulated commerce, in a lot of ways and in some communities, has created a public safety and an environmental crisis. We've seen home invasions, we've seen people blowing up homes, we've seen our waterways destroyed and negatively impacted. And so I mention this because there are some serious concerns that need to be addressed with cannabis, commercial cannabis, in our communities. But I would caution against just putting out a ban and saying, we don't want these problems, we're just going to shut this industry down. I think it's also important to recognize that one of the ways that we solve these problems, we solve the public safety crisis, we solve the environmental crisis, is we provide a pathway into a regulated marketplace. This is how we make our communities safer. I would also, this might sound a little bit bold, but I would venture to state that there is no middle ground in this industry. I think as a locality, each locality has to determine if they want this or they don't. And if you want this, I don't think there's any dipping your toe in. I think there needs to be a commitment made to thoroughly understand this issue, to inform yourselves, to gather as much information as you possibly can, so that you can go back and you can make your communities better, safer, and you can do so from a place of information and knowledge. And so, in knowing that everybody has to ultimately decide, do they want to incorporate cannabis into their communities or do they not, I would also suggest that you don't make this decision rashly and that you take your time to learn and to educate yourselves. And so, a couple of things that you can do to obviously you're all here, so you're taking that first step, but once you go back to your localities, there are some things that you can do immediately out of the gate, and some of these things have worked well for the city of Shasta Lake. So I would encourage you to get to know your cannabis industry. Even if you represent a locality that has a ban, I guarantee your industry is there. And unfortunately, the bad actors in the cannabis industry often get the headlines, but there are good actors as well. And so I would encourage you to get to know them and to give them a chance. One of the best things that the city of Shasta Lake has done is, back in 2010, they created an ad hoc committee for cannabis specifically. So up until, I would say last year, the ad hoc committee convened sporadically. Since the passage of the MCRSA in 2015, we've been convening much more often. But this is a great way to bring industry to the table, bring some of your local electeds, and the other stakeholders that are sensitive to this industry, law enforcement, chambers of commerce, school boards. Get them all together. Another option would be a stakeholder roundtable. Again, publicly noticed meetings, but much more controlled environment and much more dynamic, interactive two-way dialogue, so that you can learn, who is your industry? Who do you have in your community? Do you have type 6 manufacturers? Do you have type 3 cultivators, type 3 1B cultivators? Who do you have? And so that can be something that can guide you in this process of learning your industry so that you can make the best decisions possible. And then if you decide to form an ad hoc committee and you ultimately decide to implement MCRSA and Prop 64 and incorporate the cannabis industry into your communities, I would look at transitioning that ad hoc committee to a standing committee. Cannabis is a complicated, complex, and rapidly changing industry, and a standing committee can help your city stay on top of things, and it can also establish trust and build new relationships between your local industry stakeholders. I would also encourage you to realize that you don't need to invent the wheel when it comes to cannabis. I think there's a tendency to want to put that in front, and that's the focal point, when we might be better served if we back off a minute, look at what the activity that we're discussing is at its foundation. So if we're talking about a dispensary, we're actually talking about retail. So within cities and counties, we already have some regulations for retail establishments and zoning for retail establishments. Similarly, if we're talking about cultivation, we're talking about agriculture. If we're talking about extraction, that's manufacturing. So we already have these zones and some local regulations at hand that we can now simply plug in cannabis and then move the ball forward from that point. I don't think we just need to look at it as how we would regulate similar industries in similar zones. So my final point, and this ties into my closing point, is understanding the supply chain. And so this is absolutely critical, especially as we move forward. And so dispensaries, I would say, because we are typically located in higher profile areas, we are an activity that people are familiar with. Even if your city or county doesn't have a dispensary, you're familiar with the mechanics of one typically. And so it might be easy to say, well, a dispensary is a safe option, let's just have one of those. But I would encourage you to consider what those dispensaries need to be successful. And if you decide you're going to implement and allow the cannabis industry into your community, ensuring that those businesses are set up for success and not failure is critical, I think, to long-term success in the community. So this brings me to my biggest concern going forward, is the supply chain. It's specifically supply chain sustainability. So to give you an idea, to give you a broader perspective on this concern, what I mean about supply chain sustainability, I want to go back to some of the 6 product categories that I mentioned earlier. So in order to fill my shelves, to fulfill those 125 transactions a day, and to keep my 16 employees, including myself, working, I need products, because at the end of the day, I am a retail establishment, and retail establishments are only as good as the products that they have to sell. So, starting with the first category, the flower, for a dispensary, 2,000 square feet, 125 transactions today, I have 70 cultivators that I work with. Of those, about 40 are indoor producers, 30 are outdoor and greenhouse producers. The difference is not, and actually I have a greater demand for outdoor and greenhouse, but indoor cultivators typically produce less, smaller square footage. To provide pre-rolls and concentrates to my customers, I work with 20 separate vendors. Edibles outside of my own, I work with 6. I work with 5 topical providers and 10 different groups that provide me seeds and plants. So to back that up for a second, of those flowers, those 70 vendors, those are type 1 through 4 licenses. Excuse me, license types 1 through 3 under MCRSA and Prop 64. The pre-rolls and concentrates, those are license types 6 and 7. Edibles also fall to a license type 6. Topicals also license type 6. Plants and seeds are going to be license type 4. And so I mention this because my biggest concern going forward is not my ability to obtain a license. And I don't say that from a place of arrogance. I have a local permit. I will be able to apply for a state license as soon as the Bureau opens up and begins accepting applications. My concern is not for my own license. My concern is, what about the 100+ providers that I just mentioned? What about their licenses? So what good is my permit if the people that supply me products can't get one? And this is my biggest message to you. Dispensaries are on the forefront. We are the most likely, if we're allowed, we have permits. The cultivators do not. The manufacturers do not. And this is my concern going forward, is how do we ensure supply chain integrity, supply chain sustainability for an industry that's supposed to come online officially in about 12 months. And so we will need the entire supply chain licensed and permitted. Now, that's not to say that I think every city and county should be looking at issuing permits for all 17 or 18 license types. That would be ridiculous. But this goes back to what I said earlier. There is no middle ground. It's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to dip your toe in. I think if you decide you want cultivators, look at what they need to be successful. If you want dispensaries, look at what they need to be successful. Because I can tell you, one dispensary in Northern California, in a very rural area, needs about 100 permits to stay viable. So, in closing for you, I would say collaborate with your local industry, find out who they are, bring them to the table, and compromise, collaborate, and be solution-oriented together. Understand that the supply chain is vital. It's not just one license type of 18, it's all of them. Visit operations if you know of them. If you live in a city that has dispensaries, go visit them. If you live in an area, I think Mendocino and Humboldt are licensing cultivation now, try to go visit the cultivation facilities, see what they look like. If you're lucky enough to know of an extraction facility, go visit that as well. If you live close enough to Shasta Lake, you can come see me. My doors are always open to give tours to anybody that wants to learn about this. But do everything you can to learn this industry so that you can make the best decisions possible and improve your community. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening.